This message comes to you from King's Church Wirral, UK. We hope that as you listen, you will be encouraged, blessed and inspired.
Hello, and welcome to this teaching from King's Church Wirral. We're in the middle of the series on the book of Joshua, and you join us today as we arrive at chapter 10. This chapter has the rather intriguing title of The Sun Stands Still, which we will get to later. I would encourage you to watch over this series to know where we are up to, but to fully appreciate this passage, I will quickly recap recent events. So Israel as a people are in the process of taking possession of the land of Canaan. In the previous chapter, we read that all the kings of Canaan had banded together in order to defeat Israel following their victory at the small city of Ai. But another group of people, the Gibeonites, knowing the strength of Israel and their God, had heard word of the victory at Jericho, that Jericho had fallen, and had deceived the people of Israel and Joshua into making a covenant not to destroy them. Israel had then found out that they were in fact Canaanites and had been deceived, but they were faithful to their covenant and did not destroy the Gibeonites. So we're in the position in the story where the Amorite kings are planning on destroying Israel, and the people of the cities of Gibeon have been promised that Israel will not destroy them. So we arrive at chapter 10 and read this. Now Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and had become their allies. He and his people were very much alarmed at this, because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all of its men were good fighters. So Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to Horam, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon. Come up and help me attack Gibeon, he said, because it had made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. So these kings are making a strategic decision. They knew Israel was the problem and the main threat to them. But rather than attack directly, they decided that the best military strategy would be to cut off Israel's new strong ally, Gibeon. Gibeon actually consisted of 4 strong cities, and it gave access to the coast. So militaristically and strategically, taking out Gibeon would weaken Israel and allow that battle to be easier. But to Israel, this was a very important move, because it was a sign of the faithfulness of God to his word to Joshua that no one would be able to resist them. Following the deception and the fact that Joshua and the people fell for the trick in the previous chapter, having not consulted God, I wonder if Joshua was expecting their next battle to be a defeat, as it was when they made a mistake with Ai, with the sin of Achan. But these kings, with their combined forces, fear Israel and their God, so aim for Gibeon instead. But God was with his people. That's what Israel would have experienced. God is with us. What does this mean for Israel though? Well, the first thing to say about this is that Israel find themselves in a very tempting situation. In some respects, circumstances offered them a way out. There was, in this attack, what might be considered a legitimate loophole. I was watching a very funny stand-up comedy show recently by a comedian called James Acaster, who talked about how much he loves a good loophole. He tells the story of how the great figure skaters Torval and Dean exploited a loophole in their famous gold medal winning bolero routine. In the situation, they wanted to dance to a piece of music that was 4 minutes and 28 seconds long. However, Olympic rules said that any routine could only last for 4 minutes, plus or minus 10 seconds, give or take. Now this was a problem. So what they did was they consulted the rulebook very closely. They looked at the letter of the law. And what they found was that the official start time for any figure skating performance was when the skates first touch the ice. As such, the first 18 seconds of that performance was performed on their knees. You've got to love a loophole. And here, Israel have a loophole. They said they wouldn't destroy the Gibeonites. But did they say anything about allowing someone else to destroy them? The kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish and Eglon have decided not to face Israel directly, but to cut off their new allies and attacking the cities of Gibeon. Seems like a way out. But Gibeon sends to Joshua for help. This is what it says. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal. Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us. My first question, what would you do? Now, we're not military leaders, but we are faced with opportunities every day to exploit little loopholes of righteousness. How many times have we heard someone say, I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you everything. It's a nice loophole. But the reality is one of allowing somebody to believe something that is not true, thus deceiving. Or maybe we might make a commitment to someone, but want a reason not to honour that commitment because, I don't know, we're really tired. So we might say, I'm not feeling great. You know, technically, being tired doesn't feel great. And it's not really your fault if the person thinks that what you mean is that you're sick, because they might think that. You haven't actually said you're sick, but they might think that. And sickness is a legitimate reason to not have to do something, because who's going to expect you to do something when you're ill? It's a lovely little loophole. I'm not feeling great. But you know what? God's not the God of the technically speaking. He's actually the God of honesty and of truth. One who says to his people, be so honest that you don't need to make oaths or to swear by things, because when you say yes, it means yes, and when you say no, it means no. In Israel's future, through the prophets, time and again, they are condemned for the exploitation of the loophole of the law. In Isaiah 58, God has this to say, yet on this day of fasting, you do as you please, and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends with quarrelling and strife and in striking each other with wicked fits. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord? Now Israel could turn around and say, you said to fast, we're fasting, we're not eating. But God's answer is, don't miss the point. The reason for the fast is based in looking after the poor. You can't fast and be unrighteous. It doesn't work that way. In Luke 14, Jesus condemns the Pharisees for the way they tithe. Now, tithing in the Bible was to support the temple and the blessing it bore. But Jesus says in Luke 14, woe to you Pharisees, you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. What he says is, don't exploit the loophole. It's not about the exact letter of each thing. It's not about exactly making sure 1/10 of every single thing you own is given. It's about the spirit of it. It's about the point. You know, in this situation with Joshua, Joshua's reputation as a trustworthy ally, Israel's reputation as an honest people, and with it, God's reputation as a faithful God whose people honour their word is at stake. Having made mistakes on the journey, Joshua elects to do the right thing, go beyond the exact wording and into the spirit of the covenant, and to not let the people of Gibeon be harmed. So he takes his troops and marches to the defence of the Gibeonite cities. Now, Friedrich Nietzsche famously said, "I might believe in the Redeemer if his followers look more redeemed." People will be looking at the church. I might believe in truth if God's people were more truthful. I might believe in the joy of God if his people look happier. I might believe in the peace of the kingdom if his people weren't so stressed out. Now, I could go on, but God's reputation to man rests on us, his people. The Bible also says, man looks on the outside, but God looks at the heart. Now, this is a great truth of God and a wonderful thing to be celebrated, that God looks at my heart rather than what I look like. But let's not forget the great truth that man is looking. He is looking at behaviour. The world is looking at how we live our lives and whether what we live matches with what we say is true. So let's read from verse 7. So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hands. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." And after an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The people of Gibeon send for help, and the people of Israel answer. And it's not some token gesture of a couple of troops led by a second-in-command leader. It's Joshua, the leader of the nation, with his very best, honoured the spirit of the promise that was made. I was reminded, as I was reading this, is a great moment in The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, where Minas Tirith is being attacked by the armies of Mordor. And they send word to the nation of Rohan seeking assistance. They like these beacons that go over the mountains. And in this film, there's this wonderful moment where Aragorn, the king who's in exile, sees the beacon being lit. He runs up, he throws open the doors of the Grey Hall of Rohan, and he says, "The beacons are lit. Minas Tirith calls for help." And the king looks up and says, "And Rohan will answer." And it's this wonderful epic moment in the middle of this fantastic film. Now, I wonder whether Tolkien had this story in mind when he wrote that scene. Gibeon has called for help, and Israel will answer. So Joshua takes his best. He takes the people of war. He takes the mighty men of valour. He is going to fight. And God speaks, telling him not to fear the people he's going to battle against, because God has given them to his hands. They marched all night to meet the battle, so as to surprise them. There's this wonderful connection going on between the might of God and the action of Joshua and the people. God has promised to deliver the enemy, but Joshua went to fight anyway. Sometimes we can be guilty of wanting God to do it all for us. And if he says he will do it, we just sit back and wait. Either that or the other end of the extreme, we make the mistake that Joshua's made previously, where we don't consult God and we just try to win the battle on our own. But God is a God who wants you to fight with him. Compete with me. That's what he says. That's what we should respond. Let's compete with him for his plans and for his purposes. This is not exclusive to Joshua. When Jesus called his disciples, he didn't just say, "Hey, look what I can do." He said, "Walk with me." And this later turned into, "Now you do it too." He didn't do this because he needed them, but because he wanted them. God is not some function machine who's only bothered about outcomes. He wants his people involved in his purposes. And in this battle, God is going to win it. But he still wants Joshua and the army there fighting. And in a wonderful moment, they march all night with all the best fighters, and then basically don't do a lot of fighting, kind of, In verse 10 it says this: Israel pursued them along the road, going up from Beth Horon, and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Mekkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them, and more of them died from their hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. Now, that's a great little description we got, but without any understanding of the geography of the land, it might not really help us because we don't know where these cities are. But biblical maps can help us to give you a sense of scale. This would have been around 5 to 8 miles, somewhere around there. That's how long the pursuit might have been. It's not some epic journey of travelling massive distance, but neither was it some easy little, stroll down the lane. It was a decent battle. It started early in the morning. We know that it started at daybreak because they've marched all night in order to surprise them. And God wins this battle in quite a similar manner to the way he won Jericho. It's not the same miracle by any means, but certainly one that required very little fighting on behalf of the people. It says that many more were killed by hail than were killed by Israel. Now, having had his people with him, God then did the majority of the bulk of the work. Now, hail is actually quite a well-reported phenomenon even today in this part of the world, in that particular part of Israel. And there have been modern reports of hailstones the size of cricket balls being recorded. Now, I've had a small experience with large hailstones. When I was younger, I used to help out with a Little League football team in Birmingham. One week in the winter, a match had to be abandoned because it started to hail. When it started, the hail was small. It was just like, okay, it's hail, okay, we'll stop the match, but it's hail, nothing to worry about. But as the storm got worse, the hailstones got bigger, till eventually I was being pelted by marble-sized hailstones, just hammering down on us, hammering down on our fingers as we were trying to put the goals away, and it hurt. It hurt to the point that we had to stop, we had to seek shelter, we had to get under a tree. It was not just an inconvenience, it was painful. Those were marble-sized. But in this situation, God is hurling down rock-sized hailstones, and they are selectively hitting and killing the Amorite warriors. It's not killing the Israelites, they're just targeted to the fleeing Amorites. Now let us learn from this passage that God wants our involvement, but we cannot win the battle. When we fight where God wants us to fight, we will have the victory, but not because we fought, but because God fought for us. We will see victory not due to our effort, but in spite of it. Yet let us not think that means God doesn't want us giving effort. He is primarily a relational God who wants us there. There's a wonderful line in Shakespeare's Henry V after the Battle of Agincourt, when the English King Henry is counting up the troops and he's won this amazing victory over the French. And he says to his troops, I don't want anyone to brag of this victory. God gave us this. And one of the troops turns to him and says, surely it is right that we report that we have won. And the king's answer to him is, yes, but with this, that every report says that God fought for us. That is the way we have to do this. Yes, we will fight. Yes, we will compete. Yes, we will contend. Yes, we will put effort in. But with every victory comes the line that God fought for us. Now, you might have reached this part. There's a lot in this. You might have reached this part with so much rich truth in it about Joshua being honourable to his word when he could have found a way out, about God including his people in the victory, or even about this miraculous hail that wipes out the entire army, and wonder, why is this passage called the day the sun stood still? Well, this is how the passage ends from verse 12. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. As it is written in the book of Jasher. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp at Gilgal. So, did the sun stop in the sky? Well, the answer to that question is found in a branch of theology known as hermeneutics. It asks the question, what is the correct way to read the Bible? And there are many debated answers to that question. One way to read it is as it is presented to us. If we do that, the passage says the sun stood still in the sky. However this was achieved, whether through diffraction of light or stopping the Earth's rotation, it's not covered in the passage. Not or any of that would be speculation, maybe a matter for debate. I will say, I'm not convinced of that answer, as the nature of the writing style and language used points, in my opinion, to a different conclusion. When I was growing up, this was always dramatised to me as some moment where time was running out in the day to defeat the fleeing armies. And at that point when time is running out, Joshua prays, and the sun stopped for 24 hours and gave them more time. But Joshua is telling the sun to stop above Gibeon and the moon to stop above Ajalon. Given the geography of the land, Gibeon is in the east, Ajalon is the west. So the sun is rising in the morning when he prays this. They're not running out of time. Overall, the understanding of the language used, the writing style, the idioms, it's complex. It involves an understanding of ancient omens and the lunar calendar and how dates were recorded. It's more complex than I really want to go in right now. But I have put a link in the video description to a website that explains a way of reading this passage that I think is more consistent with the writing styles of the day. David G. Furd's commentary, the book of Joshua, from the Bible Speaks Today commentary series, also draws this conclusion, that there is a nuance to this with regard to the poetic language of it. If you want to have the discussion, that's fine. I don't really want to get into it now, because it's not really the point of what I want to say today. The whole point of this passage is that God fought for Israel and answered Joshua's prayer. It is noted in the passage that the amazing event of that story is actually not the sun pausing in its flight, but rather this line: there has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. That's the takeaway of the story. God fought for Israel. God listened to the direction of Joshua. As we see to outwork in our church the vision that God has given us, He wants our involvement. He desires our efforts. He will direct us, and we will see His miraculous working. But through it all, we must hold to the fact that it is God who will bring the victory, and we must remain close to Him through it all. Thanks for listening.
We hope that you've been blessed by this message. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at www.kingschurchwirral.co.uk.